It's not a secret that astrophysics is difficult. One would have to be crazy to think that the space scientists out there are doing something easy. Personally, I think it is mind-blowing to even think about the endless space for more than a minute because there is no fathomable closure to the thought spiral. Plus, the sheer enormity of the universe really does put our petty private lives into perspective, doesn't it? Existential angle aside, the gravity of human beings actually sitting down and doing the math to figure out hypotheticals, as well as solid information about the universe, is very intense. Even more so when you consider that even one slip-up can literally cost millions of dollars. But erring is nothing but a human trait at the end of the day, especially when it comes down to rocket science. Today, we will be covering a few faux pas that went behind some of the biggest rocket science fails in history. Keep watching till the end as we'll be going in chronological order of a few iconic explosions. Design flaw in the Atlas SM-65A. If you are a fan of rocket science, you might know that the Atlas is famous for its three-engine design. Now, it might come as a bit of a surprise because the one that we're talking about now is basically the predecessor of the three-engine design. The United States Air Force launched the first two-engine Atlas missile on the 11th of June in the year 1957. The Atlas SM-65A took off from Launch Complex 14 of Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida, and the launch was more or less smooth at the beginning. The missile took off and was following the preset trajectory, but disaster struck very soon. The B-2 engine randomly ran out of thrust, and as if on cue, the B-1 engine followed suit. At a maximum altitude of 2,900 meters, the Atlas sort of keeled over and came plummeting down. The shower of debris hit the test base, and the rocket was remotely killed after a while. What had gone wrong was that the exhaust gas from the engine thrust was directly hitting the propellant lines. Now we're talking about exhaust gas from a literal rocket launch. It might be a little hard to imagine it, but think of it in terms of incredible heat. Nothing that a heat shield couldn't deal with, but definitely something that harmed the propellant lines enough for the missile to come tumbling down. The whole operation ended in an epic explosion. Unfortunately, this is not the only Atlas fail in the history of space missions. The Titan 1C3 RVX-3. So this is around the time when the Titan 1 was the epitome of American space technology. In 1959, the United States had just kickstarted their sixth attempt to launch what was their first multi-stage intercontinental ballistic missile. Oh, and this would also be the first time that Launch Complex 16 of the Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida would be used. Quite a series of firsts, huh? If first times really terrify you, you're not alone. Do leave a like on the video as symbolic solidarity for all the nervous comrades. Well, it would be great if beginner's luck favored them. But if the Titan 1 is featured on this list, you already know that it didn't. The moment the engine revved up, the rocket actually started to shake, and it became very clear in a matter of seconds this was not a good sign. In fact, the shaking was so violent that the juggernaut sort of set off the termination system. Bear in mind that all this is happening while the spacecraft is still on the brand new launch pad. And yeah, you guessed it right. Launch Pad 16 was quite wrecked for quite a while after this. They did eventually manage to make it operational again, but the 2 months in between almost definitely went into mourning the Titan 1 because a successful launch would have been quite a spectacle. The Atlas-Centaur of 1965. After the failure of the Atlas SM-65A, the developers didn't lose their innovative streak just because of that one setback, obviously. Convair, the makers of that model, continued the good work they were doing, and eventually came up with an upper stage rocket technology that could utilize hydrogen as fuel. Pinning their hopes on the Atlas-Centaur upper stage, they planned to launch it on the 2nd of March in 1965. This one launch was rather unfortunate. A fraction of a second into the operation, the main fuel valve just closed off. The launch fell flat on its face, quite literally. The Atlas-Centaur sort of crashed straight back onto the pad, and the explosion that followed was quite colossal. The Atlas-Centaur did go on to be established as having one of the best upper stages even to this day. Apparently, it has been used in 245 missions right up until 2018, which was just a few years ago. All's well that ends well after all. Isn't it amazing that this technology went on to become such an essential part of space science history? The Proton M. Frankly, this wasn't a mishap that anyone was expecting. After all, this 2013 was Russia's 388th launch of the Proton M rocket. The objective was to put new GLONASS satellites into the orbit, but the rocket almost hadn't even left the pad when something went very wrong. The rocket began to go very obviously off track. The ironically fun bit is that the magnanimity of the explosion was actually because Russia apparently wasn't a huge fan of the self-destruct feature in their spacecraft. Naturally, the giant rocket had its engines blaring as it crashed back onto Earth at full speed, and it was when the rocket hit the soil that it released all of its explosive potential. After the shock of the explosion had died down, it became obvious that it was all because 3 of the velocity sensors were affixed wrong way up. It's sort of like what happens when you misread the instructions and mess up your IKEA furniture, except that the degree of the disaster is 1,000 times more heavyweight. Well, it's kind of a major bummer that the slight overlooked error caused one of the largest cases of land pollution to ever have been caused by a rocket. SpaceX's Falcon 9. Very recently, SpaceX has been pouring their heart and soul into landing their Falcon 9 rockets. It's technically okay for these attempts to go haywire, because they were only attempts after all. SpaceX rapidly carried out a bunch of these and ultimately perfected the advanced orbital class liquid fuel technology. But the one in January of 2015 was especially memorable because initially, everything was going very well. Obviously, everything always goes well till it doesn't. Well, this video is beginning to sound like a true crime story at this point, so let's backtrack a bit. What basically happened is that the booster ran out of hydraulic fuel, and a rocket as large as a 15-storied building just came crashing down onto the launch pad. But of course, you have to credit the SpaceX geniuses for figuring the technology out with repeated attempts. Today, they have perfected it, which means that the literal crash and burn of the first attempt was just a stepping stone towards perfection. Obviously, these were all projects with brilliant people working tirelessly behind them. Now, we wouldn't want to disrespect any of their efforts or hard work. The point here is to have a look at these phenomenal rocket science failures, and maybe wonder at the endless capacity of the human mind. After all, ultimately all of these have human beings like you and me behind them, developing the fundamental math. Feel free to cover more space science explosions you'd like us to cover in the comments, or just to marvel at sheer human intelligence. Don't forget to like and share the video. And if you enjoy this video, make sure you subscribe to our channel to remain updated. See you again when we're back with our next video.